Hey, welcome back to our channel. It is accurate to say that plane travel is among the safest modes of transportation. However, when aviation accidents do happen, the results are often catastrophic. There are no such things as minor airplane collisions or crash landings. These occurrences are devastating, life-altering events. Today we are going to see the top 5 mysterious aircraft crashes. Number 5. Air France Flight 447. Air France Flight 447 was a regularly scheduled international passenger flight from Rio de Janeiro Galeão International Airport, Brazil, to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, France. The crash on June 1, 2009 shook the world of air travel when Flight F447 disappeared from radars as it crossed the night sky during a storm over the Atlantic between Brazil and Senegal. The Airbus A330 had vanished without a mayday sign. As the plane approached the equator on its way to Paris, it had entered a so-called intertropical convergence zone that often produces volatile storms with heavy precipitation. As a storm buffeted the plane, ice crystals present at high altitudes had disabled the plane's airspeed sensors, blocking speed and altitude information. The automatic pilot function stopped working. In the first minute after the autopilot disconnection, the failure of the attempt to understand the situation and the disruption of crew cooperation had a multiplying effect, inducing total loss of cognitive control of the situation. The aircraft went into a sustained stall, signaled by a warning message and strong buffeting of the aircraft. Despite these persistent symptoms, the crew never understood they were in a stall situation and therefore never undertook any recovery maneuvers. The pilots responded to the situation by pointing the nose upward, rather than downward, to recover. A flurry of ECAM messages and warnings bombarded the pilots. Among them, a stall warning could be heard. Master warning and caution lights had illuminated. In the chaos of lights, sounds, and confusion, the pilots went back and forth, trying desperately to grasp the situation, inadvertently turning the flight into a roller coaster of up and down pitches over the next couple of minutes. Finally, recording stopped and Air France 447 found itself in a stall and fell out of the sky, crashing into the Atlantic Ocean, along with 216 passengers and the 12 crew members. Number 4. Egypt Air Flight 990. Flight 990 originated in Los Angeles and made a stop in New York City, after which it was to continue on to Cairo. It had 217 passengers on board. Less than 25 minutes later, the airplane leveled at its assigned altitude of 33,000 feet. However, it lost communication and at approximately 1:50 a.m. it began to descend rapidly, at a very steep angle of 40, to an altitude of about 16,000 feet. During the dive, it approached the speed of sound, far exceeding the maximum safe speed for a Boeing 767. Less than a minute later, the descent stopped, and the airplane regained altitude, up to about 25,000 feet, and changed direction. Then the plane began its fatal descent, losing its left engine before crashing into the ocean. All those on board 203 passengers and 14 crew members were killed. Among the passengers were a large group of Egyptian military officers who were returning from a training exercise in the United States. The Egyptian Civil Aviation Authority carried out its own investigation and issued a report that rejected the possibility that Captain al-Batouti had caused the crash. The Egyptians found that sheared rivets in the elevator control mechanism caused the problem, and that everyone in the cockpit was working together to regain control up to the time the plane hit the water. Number 3. TWA Flight 800. Trans World Airlines TUA Flight 800 was a scheduled flight from New York JFK to Rome, with a stop in Paris. On the evening of July 17, 1996, the flight carried 212 passengers and 18 crew members. This included a flight deck crew of 4, headed by Captain Ralph G. Kevorkian, who had flown for TUA for 31 years. It took off from JFK and began its climb to cruising altitude. The last received transmission was at 20:30, when the crew acknowledged Boston Center's instruction to climb to 15,000 feet. Minutes after the last transmission, ATC began receiving reports from other aircraft about hearing or seeing an explosion in the area. The horrifying crash gripped the world. Almost immediately, there was speculation that it had been a terrorist attack. Then SBS eventually concluded that the explosion was the result of an explosion of the fuel-air vapor in the center wing fuel tank. After 4 years of investigation, the NTSB report in 2000 concluded The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the 20 Flight 800 accident was an explosion of the center wing fuel tank QUT, resulting from ignition of the flammable fuel or air mixture in the tank. Although it could not be determined with certainty, the likely ignition source was a short circuit. 1XV problems with the aircraft's wiring were found, including evidence of arcing in the fuel quantity indication system wiring that enters the tank. The captain remarked about crazy readings from the system about 2 minutes and 30 seconds before the aircraft exploded. Witnesses near the area reported seeing an explosion in the sky and a fireball over the ocean. Debris rained into the water and spread across a 4-mile radius. The widespread distribution of wreckage and eyewitness observations were the first indications that 2800 had experienced a sudden and catastrophic in-flight structural failure. It had been airborne for only 12 minutes. For almost 25 years, the wreckage of Flight 800 was kept by the SBS and used as an accident investigation teaching aid. The methods taught using the wreckage were determined to no longer be relevant to modern accident investigation, so NTSB it decommissioned the wreckage in July 2021. Helios Airways Flight 522 was a flight from Larnaca, Cyprus to Prague, Czech Republic, with a stopover to Athens, Greece. It crashed on August 14, 2005, following loss of pressure that incapacitated the crew, killing all 121 passengers and crew on board. That morning, the aircraft arrived from London and the previous flight crew had reported a frozen door seal and abnormal noises coming from the right aft service door. The inspection was carried out by a ground engineer who then performed a pressurization leak check. In order to carry out this check without requiring the aircraft's engines, the pressurization system was set to manual. However, the engineer failed to reset it to auto. After completing the checking, the flight crew failed to notice the incorrect setting. The aircraft took off at 9:07 with the pressurization system still set to manual, and the aft outflow valve partially open. As the aircraft climbed, the pressure inside the cabin slowly decreased. As they passed 12,040 feet, the cabin altitude warning horn sounded. The crew mistook it for a takeoff configuration warning, which signals that the aircraft is not ready for takeoff and can only sound on the ground. The alert sound is similar for both warnings. The equipment cooling warning lights came on to indicate low airflow through the cooling fans. The passenger oxygen light illuminated when at an altitude of approximately 18,000 feet 500 m. The oxygen masks in the passenger cabin deployed. The captain radioed the Helios Operations Center and reported, and in return was asked by engineer, "Can you confirm that the pressurization panel is set to auto?" The captain, who was already starting to feel the initial symptoms of hypoxia, disregarded the question and instead asked in reply, "Where are my equipment? Cooling circuit breakers?" This was the last communication with the aircraft. The aircraft passed from Cyprus Flight Information Region into Athens FIR, without making contact with Athens ATC. Two F-16 fighter aircraft from the Hellenic Air Force from Niankialos Air Base to find the aircraft. They found the passenger jet and observed that the first officer was slumped motionless at the controls and the captain's seat was empty. They also reported that oxygen masks were dangling in the passenger cabin. Flight attendant Andreas Prodromou entered the cockpit. His experience was insufficient for him to be able to gain control of the aircraft under the circumstances. But almost as soon as he entered the cockpit, the left engine failed due to loss of fuel. The plane left the holding pattern and started to descend. 10 minutes after the loss of power from the left engine, the right engine also failed, and just before the aircraft crashed into hills near Grammatiko, 40 kilometers from Athens, killing all 121 passengers and crew on board. Number 1. Malaysian Airlines, Flight 370. MH370 disappearance of a Malaysia Airlines passenger jet on March 8, 2014, during a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The disappearance of the aircraft with 227 passengers and 12 crew members on board. The perplexing nature of the loss of Flight 370 is such that it has become one of history's most famous missing aircraft. Flight 370 took off at 12:41 a.m. local time and reached a cruising altitude of 10,700 meters at 1:01 a.m. The aircraft communication addressing and reporting system, which transmitted data about the aircraft's performance, sent its last transmission at 1:07 a.m. and was subsequently switched off. At 2:22 a.m., Malaysian military radar lost contact with the plane over the Andaman Sea, and Inmarsat satellite in geostationary orbit over the Indian Ocean received hourly signals from Flight 370 and last detected the plane at 8:11 a.m. Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak announced that, based on analysis of the final signals, Inmarsat and the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch had concluded that the flight crashed in a remote part of the Indian Ocean 2,500 kilometers southwest of Australia. Thus, it was extremely unlikely that anyone on board survived. The disappearance of MH370 is still a mystery in spite of many speculations. This was out today's video. Thanks for watching. See you again in next video.